Football made simple. Become great at your craft by finding ways to make it simple for those around you. This is the Coaching 101 podcast hosted by Findaway Productions with your co-host, Daniel Chamberlain and Kenny Simpson. What's up, coaches? This is the Coaching 101 podcast. I am Daniel Chamberlain here with Kenny Simpson. Coach, how are things over in Arkansas today?
Man, they're going well. You know, I for a long time, I always enjoy doing these podcasts. So if a guy's listening to this, you just got to vision what I'm talking about. But if you're watching it, you're seeing it live here. I've always had the best backgrounds of anyone ever because my wife is our graphic designer. And today I just got upstaged by our guest, Cody. I don't know how he did what he did, but I'm kind of offended right now that he has the better background of the two of us.
Well, that's a great segue into introducing our guest today. So today we're joined by Coach Cody Alexander. Coach, why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are and what you do, and just a quick introduction about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Cody Alexander. Run Match Quarters, which is a content brand, kind of a media brand that centers around defensive schematics. It's something I've built now for, I think, the past 7 years. Really been doing it full time for the past year and a half now, having a lot of fun. Wherever you use social, I'm probably on there. Just search Match Quarters. A lot of what I do is kind of based off of Twitter, and then obviously I kind of got started writing, so I still have matchquarters.com, which is more or less a house for my archives and my template shop. But you can find mostly what I do now on my Substack. So download the Substack app, search Match Quarters, type in your email, and then you'll get. I try and write two articles a week to try and keep everybody on trend and what's going on in the NFL and college football.
Awesome. Well, we're sure glad to have you today. I'm glad we could get the schedule worked out and get you in on the podcast, man, because I know I've been looking forward to it, and Coach has been like pushing me, get that man in here. And I'm sure that the listeners will absolutely love that you've joined on the show as well. Before we get going, Coach Simpson, why don't you tell us some simple ways that we can kind of bring schematics down for coaches and players in football?
Yeah, so glad we got Cody on here. I think he's a believer in the simplicity also. But Coaching 101 podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions, which houses offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things offense, workbooks, templates, the full academy. It also houses defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, the same thing, but for defense. And we actually were blessed enough to have Cody come on and do a session in that where he had me draw up all kinds of crazy formations you had to line up against. It was one of my favorite sessions, but it's over at defensivecoordinatoracademy.com. Finally, also sponsors FBCoachSimpson.com, which is all things football. Gun T system is there. The 3-4 swarm is there. Head coaching materials are there, and 32 books now, almost 33. We got the next one about ready to come out right before the season starts. So plenty of materials over there.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Just quickly mention, and you'll hear this on every other episode, so I'll be a little shorter, but Adaptable PT, that's Adaptable Physical Therapy. That's my wife and I's clinic. We've opened in Grove, Oklahoma. So if you're Northeast Oklahoma, Northwest Arkansas, some of you Missouri and Kansas cats can probably even make the trip. Dr. Chamberlain is my wife. She is there to take care of whatever ails you. If you've got players that have suffered concussions, knee injuries, shoulders, elbow, whatever it is, they can hurt on Thursday nights, Friday nights, Monday nights, whenever you have kids on the field or in training, practice. Feel free to come on over to Adaptable PT there in Grove. You can reach us at adaptablept@gmail.com. Also, tongue-tied. All these things start with an A, so that's why I'm tongue-tied. AthleticSpeedAndMovement.com is where Joe, Daniel, and I have taken Del Basquet's 40-plus years of speed development knowledge and put it at your fingertips online. Level 1's available right now. It is a 12-week program. You can run it multiple times a year. You don't run it one time and quit. Guaranteed results. Okay, your kids are going to get faster. Spoke with 2 NFL players yesterday on doing some interviews, and both of them said that in college at D1 level, they both play D-line, linebacker, outside linebacker, and safety. So speed matters. Speed kills. Your kids will be multiple and be able to play wherever you need them as soon as you can get them fast. And that's what this program does. That's athleticspeedandmovement.com. You can go there and sign up before, well, that has passed. So you missed your discount. Hopefully you listened to the podcast and got in last week. But if not, then you can go on and sign up today. It's a 1-year subscription. Sweet. All that's done. Let's jump into new things. So, Coach Alexander, we're going to start with you today, and that is we want to talk about what you're seeing that's new at all levels of football, but what are people doing new in defensive coverages that we can expect to see filter down to the high school level?
Yeah, I think the biggest trend right now is regardless of whether you're a middle of the field closed or middle of the field open coverage system, that you're going to do everything from a too high shell. I think that's the biggest, that's kind of the umbrella. That's where everybody's kind of starting now. It's been really interesting. Every year I pick a defense that I want to learn. And so I try and get as much resources on it. I watch as much film as I can. I talk to people within the system and try and learn that. This off season was really the off season of Fangio. I really wanted to nail down on the specifics. I was actually one of the first people to start writing about his system back in 2020 because it made sense to me. I've always done everything from a too high shell. So, it kind of the light bulb went off, but I wanted to learn everything. The NFL is still a cover 3 dominant system. Just in general, you're going to have a lot of cover 3. Cover 1 is still very popular there. And I would even argue at the college level, you still see more cover 3 than you will quarters, just depending on what ecosystem you are. But what is new is that in the NFL particularly, we're seeing a transition to more too high, at least contours pre-snap. You go and you look at data. So I went back and I looked at, in fact, I think later today I'll have a post of cover 6, which is half quarter or quarter half, which we'll talk about the differences there here in a second. But even at the cover 6 level, so the quarter half level, you have seen kind of almost a doubling in 5 years of the percentage. It went from 4% of the play calls on defense in the NFL in 18, and it has jumped to over 8%. So you have seen that trend. The quarters trend, I think, is the biggest one. More teams are playing quarters in the NFL than ever before, which is brand new. Teams have, and again, I preface this because when I started doing Fangio, I got all these older coaches who are very familiar with Dom Capers, who's the defensive senior assistant for Carolina for Evero. And then also everybody knows who Dick LeBeau is. He's kind of the face of the fire zone. But everybody's been very quick to say, this Fangio system is really just Dom Capers and Dick LeBeau. And all of this, to give you the full history lesson, all of this started with the 1986 Saints. So back in Jim Mora, if you don't know who Jim Mora Sr. is, he's the guy, the meme of playoffs. That's Jim Mora Sr. I was lucky enough this year to go travel to UConn and meet Coach Jim Mora the Jr. and be able to spend time with his staff. So that was really fun. Also got to speak with John Pagano, who worked for Fangio for 2 years in the Broncos system. Just finding out all the nuances and how all that stuff was created was really cool. So that's kind of the full Fangio system, kind of why I'm looking at that. What he has done and really what Staley did with LA, and then again when he went to the Chargers is, we're 80% plus too high shell pre-snap, and that's never been done in the NFL ever. So yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Coach.
Well, I'm just saying, like, that's the biggest thing. So when you have these older coaches come to you and they're like, well, this is Dick LeBeau and Don Capers, it's like, yes, I do understand that. But what is undeniable is the too high shell that you're seeing.
Well, he's going to have tools. I'm a Dolphin fan, so I can speak a little bit to what he's walking into. So I do want to hit a couple other questions you've got too, but let's talk about Miami because you're on the Dolphins and I could talk Dolphins all day. I'm a big fan. But he just walked into Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard, Holland at safety, probably 3 Pro Bowlers in his secondary, and 2 guys that could lock down any receiver. So do you think Miami is going to go to a lot more zone? That's the rumors. That's what his system is a lot more zone, because Miami's been predominantly man for a long time. Man, zero, with all that. So do you think he's going to keep what he's doing, or will he adjust a little bit?
Fangio is an interesting character because everywhere he's been willing to change not only his the names that he calls things, but also adjust the system. I thought Evero did a really good job at the Broncos illustrating how you can run this system with press. If you go and you look at the Broncos with Surtain and then Mathis from Pitt, and if you know anything about quarters, you have watched Pitt football and you have watched press quarters, four-lock, whatever you want, 9-man spacing, whatever you want to call it. You've seen that. So when you have two on-ball corners like that, and then two, when he goes to the Dolphins, he's going to have Ramsey who can play on, he can play off, he can play in the nickel. You've got Xavier Howard, who really, to me, and I know Xavier personally. He was at Baylor when I was at Baylor. Great kid. He is a great on-ball physical corner. Has some zone mechanics that he can play with. So I think you're going to see a little bit more match, tighter, not as loose, and I think you will see a little bit more cover one, and probably his blitz rates will probably go higher just because of the front seven that he has, and then being able to place the man in the background. That's the one thing that I really you really have to tip your hat to Fangio, is that at every place he's been, he's kind of morphed. When he was with the Bears, that's kind of when that penny front stuff, that 5-1 stuff that you're seeing a lot of these teams do now, that's kind of where that was. Well, he had Khalil Mack, and he had Roquan Smith, who could sit in the middle. Why you don't want anybody else on the field, right? So 5-1 makes sense. And then he goes to the Broncos, where he's got these two really good edge players, one in Von Miller, and then you have Bradley Chubb, who's now with the Dolphins. And so why, you don't really have three interior guys that you can play with. So what do? You run more traditional nickel stuff. So I think he's shown that he's willing to change where he goes. He's talked about that he's going to have some new coverages this year. I'm interested. Dolphins will be definitely a must watch this year for sure.
Another question I had for you too is, you're talking about all the adjustments in the NFL, and we're talking about trickle down here, because I think defensively, the NFL has always been a little bit ahead of every other level. I think the opposite, personally, offensively. I think offensively, everything kind of trickles up. So what's got into the NFL is causing the defenses to make these adjustments, which I think is going to now trickle down to high school, is stopping the RPO. That's got to be number one on every defensive's radar. Is that why you think we're seeing more of the too high shell and then disguising what they're doing? Because, as an RPO guy, if I can identify what you're in, I can call the correct RPO multiple times. But if you're giving me a too high shell and I'm getting in some different looks, that's what killed Miami when they played the Chargers. The Chargers were getting into a bunch of stuff and clouding that middle of the field and taking that stuff away. Is that kind of why you think we're seeing this, or is there another reason?
Yeah, I think one thing that you see at the NFL level that you just don't see at the high school level is condensed sets. Just the reductions and everything works to the middle of the field. Plus, then you start getting change of strength motion, quick motion. The best way to deal with that is to get in a too high shell and have your corners handle the flats, and that tends to be an easy answer. I think also too at the NFL level, just there is a power run game element with it, and it's not just it's the reason why it's interesting, because you're a wing T guy, and I was thinking about this when before we got on here today, is the wing T is still a viable offense at kind of the smaller college level and at the high school level, because you can get defenses out of balance, but then there's also that downhill run game element of sometimes you can just be tougher. Like some of these suburban schools and these inner city schools that really lean into the 7-on-7 culture, that really lean into the spread and the air raid and kind of the passing game part of that, you can get them in a situation where the physicality of that and the downhill run of that is just not going to match. I think at the NFL, the perimeter game of the wing T shows up, and I think it's funny, because on Twitter, there's every week after the NFL, there's going to be, oh, hey, this is a wing T play. Hey, this is a wing T. But it's the caveat to that is it's always a perimeter hitting play. Right. Power, counter, a trap have always been staples in the NFL. They've always been from under the center, always had that downhill run game. So you still have that element in the NFL, but there's a perimeter game of that. To match that, though, I think, like you said, the trickle up effect of RPOs, the air raid, going to the alert instead of the intermediate, working top down instead of working intermediate low. Then, hey, if you don't defend it or we've got a burner, we'll throw, you throw the shot play every once in a while. Now it's, let's throw the shot play. If it's not there, just check down to the intermediate. And I think too, at the NFL level, it used to not be where the NFL was kind of ahead of the game. It was always kind of like, we just run cover 3, we run cover 1. I think with the fire zones, I think that there's been times within the history of the NFL where with the fire zones, with what we're seeing now with the 2 high shell, like it just turns a light bulb on for some guys at the lower level. I think one coverage in particular that if I was a high school coach right now, I would go to the nearest college that I can find, because this is where you really see it more than anything else. And I would learn how to run bracket and how people run bracket. That, to me, that is going to be the next evolution at the high school level. We already have cover 4 and we have cover 4 and quarters for the quarterback run game. We have cover 2 for the perimeter hitting RPOs. What do we do now that we're getting slants? We're getting snags. We're getting fin routes, 5 and in. We're getting a lot of these in-breaking routes because defenses know how to take away the gift read, like you mentioned, right? If I go from a 2 high shell, and I've been a proponent of that for a long time. That's why the Fangio system really kind of resonated with me, was because I've always believed in a static pre-snap look, right? I want it, every time that offensive coordinator puts a clip on, it looks the exact same every time, and then all hell breaks loose after the snap. That to me has always been a big part of my philosophy towards defending RPOs. Bracket to me is such a big college coverage. You really don't see it anywhere else. The NFL, you don't see it just because they would rather just spin to cover 3. They don't want to play that read match. And they would rather, if they're going to have a slot corner, they might as well just go ahead and play him more of a match or man. Whereas at the college level, you now have guys that are kind of in between. And so to me, that has been, I mean, there's whole defenses at the college level that they consider themselves quote unquote quarters defenses, but they are basing out of bracket, which all you've done is taken the overhang, aligned them outside, and you've switched the rules. Now the overhang is all of 2 up and out, and the safety's your apex player, but he's playing from the table, which gives you leverage on fin routes and slant routes, which are inviting when you look at bracket contours pre-snap.
All right, Coach. So
you're a young guy. Hold on. Yeah, I know what you're about to say. So it's a lot of terms. All he's saying is you're taking your outside linebacker or strong safety and putting him between 2 and 1. That's what I'm assuming there, Coach.
Right.
And then he's going to now handle number 1 in breaker or number 2 out breaker. Is that what you're saying? Tell me if I'm right.
But more of a match mentality. So what you described is old school robber coverage, inverted 2, however you want to. It's all triangles, right? So we're just trying to create different triangles. This is more of a match concept. Now what we're seeing with offenses is we have what's called a power slot, right? We have, instead of aligning our best receiver at X, let's put him at the slot. We can send him in jet motion and run the ball with him. We can motion him into the backfield, run the ball with him. We can start him in the backfield, motion him out. We can really do a lot of different things to really mess with you when he's at the slot. And so how do we get a bracket on the slot receiver? And the best way to do that is take your match quarters that you've already been running, and all you're doing is now switching responsibility. The nickel now is taking all of 2 up and out, which if you run 4 lock or you run 9-man spacing quarters, that's been your safety's responsibility forever. And then your overhang or your apex player has always just kind of cut the in breaking route. Now, I do get questions all the time. Well, what if it's a shallow? Okay, well, if it's a shallow, then it turns into robber, right? It really just turns into quarters. It turns into a box. Your Mike works to works to the mesh route. Your nickel's going to find work, which means he's going to cut 1, and then your safety's just playing from the hash. So it ends up playing a lot like quarters. It's just a different variation of quarters. You're just playing more of a match scheme. So I'm glad you brought that up, because yes, if you're sitting here and you're listening, you're like, well, this sounds a lot like old school robber. It is, but we've really screwed it down, and we've really made it, because that corner now is playing man coverage, or what's called Meg coverage, man everywhere he goes on number 1.
Got it. Okay, yeah, so it makes sense. So Daniel, make sure, because you're a guy we're testing on that. You kept, so we're locking up number one, and basically we're double covering number two, unless he runs a shallow across the field or whatever.
Right. And two, for that safety, if you do, let's say they run a fade out, right? Let's say that they run a fade out, then your nickel or your Sam, whatever you call him, is going to take number two out. That safety now becomes a hash safety, find work. So all of your teaching mechanics, because that's always the thing when you add new coverages. And we've talked about this before, Kenny, multiple times. It's like, I want to be simple, but I don't want to be simplistic, right? So how can I make things simple for my kids? Well, all we're doing is flipping it. Your safety doesn't really need to change. He can be a little bit more aggressive to the run, and he becomes your apex defender. But if we get pass and we get an out by two or an under by two, he just becomes a hash safety, which is what you already have been teaching anyway.
Good. I think that's probably going to lead into what we got next anyway, isn't it, Coach?
That's right. So next question. So for those of you that are spinning right now, we're going to talk about the differences, and that's okay, right? Because more complex things are great. You need them, and it just takes time to learn them. So the next question is going to be, we start looking at differences in these pattern matchings and all these different versions of that, and then just old school spot drop. Like, can we still old school spot drop out of this too high look when just spinning people down? And so what is our differences there, Coach?
I think you have to be careful spot dropping anybody other than a box player. I think you start getting in trouble now versus these spread teams. If you're going to spot drop with your Sam linebacker, then you basically need to be playing zero coverage. So if you, again, I go back to Pitt. If you've ever watched Pitt, you've ever watched Narduzzi, you've ever watched any of those, like in 9-man spacing, meaning that those safeties are responsible for two out and up. So we're essentially playing blitz coverage, but we're calling it quarters because it does have some rules. We're going to zone out. We're going to zone off of him if he goes inside. I think you can do some spot dropping, or what I would term it vision dropping. I would stay away from spot dropping. Spot dropping became really popular because the West Coast offense was such a timing offense, and then it would just go straight to a one spot, and you knew where that curl was. Like when they ran the Hank concept, you knew exactly where that was going to go. You got this formation, you knew this concept was coming, you knew you needed to drop to right here. Well, offenses, and this is the evolution of football, and this is why defense is so hard, because the offense changes before the defense changes. So the offenses then started saying, well, what if we just option that guy off of your leverage? Well, now that creates issues. So what's the best way to defend an option route? Well, just play man coverage, right? So that's when you see cover one becoming really the dominant scheme in the NFL, was because it's like, well, now they're optioning everybody. Let's just play cover one. I think now with really the air raid system and the run to space and find open grass, like that kind of has become now more or less where we're going. So when you start spot dropping to spots, you better have pressure behind it. I think you can get away with, like, if you are into the creeper and sim world, which is really you're just running replacement pressures. I'm taking a second or a third level defender. I'm blitzing him on a regular path, a traditional path, hitting the B gap, C gap. And then I'm dropping the defensive end away, which a lot of 3-4 teams, a lot of odd stag teams, you're like, man, we've been doing this forever. It's just become now the norm in 4 down and the 3 down world. And people now have a normalized language for it. But you're doing it purposefully. When you do that, I think your first level defenders, they don't need to know how to match. It goes back to teaching, right? How can I teach my defensive end match techniques? Well, that becomes really difficult. So how do I mitigate that? Well, I'm telling him to either cut number one. I'm telling him just drop vertically and read the quarterback. Drop into the middle of the formation, read the quarterback. Hey, I'm dropping you to a spot. And then this is where I go back to the NFL and the too high. Now we can start mixing in, because we are cover 3 dominant. We can mix in some quarters rules to help our first level defenders, so that they're really just flat defenders, or they're a bang to buzz defender. They're going to bang on the seam, and then he's going to buzz the flat, or he's going to grab the running back as he goes to the flat. Things that are already easy. If you run 6-man pressures and you peel, right, the running back, you've already worked a lot of this stuff. If you have if you've been running replacement pressures or fire zones and you're dropping the defensive end, you're probably having him drop to a spot. So you already have this stuff in. So it's not, I think that to me is the biggest. Spot dropping in the NFL is still kind of a thing, but it's more or less you're really looking at the edge defenders and then maybe your Mike linebacker or inside linebacker who's just kind of dropping to an area and then playing with vision. But we're matching everything out. And I think that's just because nowadays, I say I use this example because I watched a clinic. This clinic is office coordinator. I can't remember, but he was like, I ran Y cross 15 different times, but it looked different every single time because of the formation or a different tag that we put into it. And so you have to understand that they're going to change. They're going to know what coverage you're running, and then they're going to know the beater off of it, and they're just going to get you in different situations. So your inside guys need to really be spot droppers, but your outside guys still need a match.
A couple of caveats I'd give here is, think about where you're coaching. Cody's coming from a world in Texas where they throw the ball a lot, very efficiently. He's coming from a collegiate level where they throw the ball a lot, very efficiently. NFL level, and you got those guys are going to be efficient. Okay, you need to consider as a coach, who do you play? What's your schedule look like? Are you in rural Kansas or Oklahoma or even Arkansas, where we do see spread teams, but they're spread to run the ball, or we see spread teams, but they're not really a timing based offense. We see spread teams, or we're going to see these teams that, they throw the ball a little bit, but they're not like going to be able to just pick me apart. There was a time when I coached in Alabama where I didn't think you could throw a 5-yard hitch all the way down the field and beat me. And so when we only saw maybe one team a year that could do that. So we would spot drop. All right, throw a 5-yard hitch. Who cares? We're going to give that to you. And there's games now where you can't do that. They will do that, and they will beat you. And so you have to kind of consider that when you're looking at, are we going to spot drop or are we going to match? In my opinion, I think Cody shares the same opinion, the match is obviously going to be better, but it's also a little more expensive to teach. There's going to be a little more time involved with that. So that's why he kind of said some kids, like inside linebackers, that you're not going to require to cover, but maybe one game a year, why would you spend that much time teaching them how to pattern match, where spot drop is probably a little bit easier? We also look at this kind of stuff, like in our spot drop, how are you teaching that? So we might play a team. I'll give you an example. We played a team this year who on 3rd and more than 7 was going to throw the ball to the sticks in the flats. So we didn't run pattern match with our outside backer. We ran spot drop. He literally would find the sticks. He'd point at the sticks before the snap. And on the snap, he would sprint there and he'd find the receiver who I knew was going to run a hitch or an out route at the sticks. And he had 2 picks. Okay, so that's an example of where spot drop was useful. Okay, if we were running a team that's going to run a bunch of curls, that would be horrible. He'd run out there and they'd run a curl right behind him. So that's kind of things you got to kind of think about. We are a big pattern match team with our outside backers, with our safeties, with our corners, simply because I'm tired of, so many teams are very good at just finding space against the zone and throwing it in there. So if you do that, and Cody's brought this up on the first and the second one here, it's not as hard as you think it is. Like a lot of people think teaching pattern match must be complicated. You probably have to be a genius. No, you just have to teach rules. It's like basketball. You teach rules. My eyes are on this guy. My hands are on this guy. And the main thing that I like about it is if you're playing these efficient offenses that throw the ball, you're not going to have wide open holes in the middle of your zone. And Cody mentioned it, there are college teams that are still running spot drop. A good example very recently would have been Ohio State, or was it Devontae Smith had like 9,000 yards in the first half on the same route because they were trying to run spot drop. And you had a guy in Alabama, Tua, that could throw it, and you had Devontae Smith who could catch it. Okay, well, that's what you have to be very aware of. And so caveat I'd put in here for a coach is if you're in some rural area where people aren't throwing the ball maybe one or two times a year where you're seeing that, maybe you don't want to put a lot of time invested in how many coverages you have or how efficient you are, because you're only going to see it twice. But if you're playing in the modern day era at a higher level, you need to have some of this ability to probably do both, probably do a little bit of both. So Cody, I'll kick that back to you. I mean, what are your thoughts kind of on just general what you're seeing the game at the high school level specifically, where it's moving.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think that you get to certain areas and there are certain systems, or hey, we're really only seeing one spread team a year. Do I really need to go all in on a match system? I think at the high school level, you kind of lean towards what I would call a zone match, which means that your underneath players are playing zone, whereas your DBs are playing your match rules. And so really you're working a lot of 2v2. The DBs are already together. You already know what routes you're getting from all your opponents. I used to, every year I would go and get on huddle, and I would sort all the 2-by formations, and whether it was doubles, whether it was 2-by-1, it didn't matter anytime I had 2 receivers, I put those all in a cut up, and then I just looked at what are the top 10 route combinations. And so I would then those would be the route matches that we would go. And then obviously I put in the beaters, things that I felt like we were going to see, or things that we struggled on that maybe weren't showing up in that. So it ended up being about a list of 15 different things. But you really are just, once you have the techniques in, now you're really just working eyes and pattern matching. And then now your underneath players really are just playing, 2-3, 3-2, where, week 2, do I have a push alert? Do I not? Do I need to have the take back on this, which means that the 3's away from you, so I have to take him back because 3's blind, right? So, and I used to tell guys all the time, especially linebackers when I was teaching coverage, if you can count to 3, you can play coverage. And it really doesn't matter because the offense only gives you 5 guys out. So there's always a midpoint, always. Unbalanced, I actually, and I know it gives a lot of people problems, but I actually preferred unbalanced because you killed a receiver. So it's one less vertical threat that I got to worry about. So to me, it was like, oh, now you just made my life a lot easier. So we can always adjust with secondary, So it was like, to me, unbalanced never bothered me. But now when I get 5 out, now I need to understand, where's 3? And you talked a great example with Ohio State, and where you get in trouble in cover 3 is who is your 3-up player. So you may not think about you may think of match because I am match quarters. You may think of, oh, well, matching's only in the quarters or the open world. There's a whole universe of cover 3 that is pattern matching. And a lot of it comes from the weak rotation side, which, wink, wink, nod, nod, really looks a lot like quarters. So you get, and 2, cover 3 guys will tell you they build in quarters rules within their cover 3 systems, because there are certain situations where you do not want your defensive end running a vertical column. You would rather have your safety on top of it, which is the same problems you have. I don't want my Mike linebacker at the high school level typically running the vertical column with number 3. And that's what you saw in Ohio State. The 3-up player in cover 3 happened to be tough Borland, who was not a Heisman Trophy winner like Devontae Smith. And so you end up getting essentially a track meet. And that's a big thing that I talk to guys all the time, DB guys all the time. And I always, with my players, we don't want track meets. The offense knows where they're going. We don't want to get into a track meet all the time, because even if, and we see this at the college and at the NFL level, these guys, we get their combine numbers. We know what there is, but it's just something different when you are not in control of what you're doing. You're going to run slower than if you know exactly where you're going. We don't want to run in lanes because that gives the receiver space. So we don't want to get in track meets. We don't want to always be in chase mentality. We want to, so there's a sense of, I would even argue that if you are a cover 3 based system, you still need to have match principles. You still need to have a quarters toolbox within that. And a lot of that comes from the weak rotation, which is what we're seeing. Again, I talked about the trends in the NFL. One of the big things is putting the cover 2 side to the passing strength or to the nickel, and having your boundary safety kind of be this bonus player, which again was one of the big things that how do you defend raw air raid? Well, a lot of the times, if I can man up the backside, I'm going to take that boundary safety and I'm just going to shift them into the middle of the field. Well, that kind of looks like cover 3. And in fact, if you talk to the Fangio guys, they talk about rotation. Well, if you are a football guy at all, and I say rotation, you're instantly going to think, you're conditioned to think cover 3. But the way that they do it, they actually rotate the coverage, meaning they put the cover 2 side to the nickel a lot of the times. And use that boundary safety. It's kind of this bonus defender. They can, so if you run solo or poach or kick, whatever you want to call it, they move him over top to take 3 up. So you're really running cover 3 principles within quarters. It's just the corners telling you. And it's funny. I've talked to some people that deal with quarterbacks and then some NFL guys and that are like the analysts that are trying to watch the games in detail coverage. And it's like, well, the problem is the quarterback is never told to read the corner. That's usually not the read when you're trying to determine coverage. It's usually the boundary safety. So the issue now is, how can I tell when it's weak rotation cover 3 or when they're running this Fangio calls it cover 8, where it's half quarter. Well, the corner to the passing strength is going to be the one that's telling you that. We can see that on the all 22 and we can see that hindsight 2020, but for a quarterback, everything looks like cover 3, but then it matches like split field coverage. And that's where I think you can get, if you are already a quarters team, it's a lot easier to go to cover 3 than it is for you to be a cover 3 team and go to quarters. I think so. So to me, that's why I've always been a quarters guy. And I know I'm biased. I mean, I match quarters, right? But I feel like that weak rotation aspect is it. And so then going back to zone match, matching it, man, basically playing man with zone underneath of it. Again, I think it gives you, we can zone everything underneath with the trash, and then we're going to cap receivers. I think that's the biggest thing nowadays. When you talk to defensive coordinators, especially at the college level in the NFL, it's like, look, we cannot give up explosives. And I don't want linebackers defending receivers. So how can I do that? At the college NFL level, they figure that problem out by putting a corner at nickel, or their best covered safety at nickel, and then they play man coverage or they play match coverage with them, and then your box is your box, right? So I think not everybody has that luxury. The last 2 years I coached high school ball, I had 5 Division I athletes when I was at Horn. 3 of them were sophomores at the time, but I had 2 seniors at corner, I had 3 sophomores in the secondary. And it was like, how can we do this? Well, we're just going to play with 3 corners. So we ended up playing a lot of cover 1, ended up playing a lot of bracket, ended up playing a lot more like a match coverage. Even though we were a 3 high defense, we played it almost like we were playing quarters, and which a lot of, hint, that's a new trend that you're seeing. TCU, Iowa State, yes, Iowa State, tight Tampa that everybody thinks it's really not, but everybody thinks that they're running a bunch of cover 2. They actually ran a bunch more quarters this year. TCU ran almost all quarters this year. So that's something that even if I'm a 3 high team or I'm an odd stat guy, and it's like, well, we've always been a cover 3 team or a Tampa team. Well, the guys at the highest level that are seeing all the crazy stuff from the offense, they're telling you right now, we're moving to quarters. I mean, Georgia, who has been, Kirby Smart's a Nick Saban guy. I think if anybody in the South is alive and has been around football, they know what Rip Liz is, and they understand the match concept, match 3. Well, you're seeing Georgia run almost 50% quarters last year. Even when they were blitzing, they were running what they call their Big 12s, which is half field zone, which is stuff that, I think me and you, Kenny, have talked about this before too, is in half field zone. It's like I zone to one side, man to the blitz side. We're playing quarters, but we're still blitzing. So we're not constantly getting in cover 3, constantly giving in cover 1. So I think those are the things when you sit down and you're looking at who my opponents are. You are correct, Kenny. If I am playing kind of these, to use a term, these dinosaur offenses, right? And I'm seeing the wing T, I'm seeing the slot T, I'm seeing the flexbone, I'm seeing this. I worked on a flexbone offense for 3 years when I was at Midlothian, and we were really good. We were scoring 30 plus a game. So this was quarters, and match quarters in particular works really, really well against the flex bone. And so, it unlocks your kids' brains a lot of time. When you go back to space, they can see these switches. They can see where I need to be hard, where I need to be soft. What do I do when I get a post wheel? What do I do when I get a curl wheel? What do I do when I get jet motion, quick motion? All of those things are problems created in the flex bone that you now have these rules built in for match. It's really easy to then go to a modern offense, and the kids kind of take a deep breath and like, oh, this is this is easy. I don't have to worry about pitch. I don't have to worry about, am I folding back inside? All of these things with unbalance and these condensed sets. So I would even argue that if flexbone is the one, you can get away with teaching match coverage. You don't have to be a spot drop, but I do think your inside guys can spot drop. And so I do understand that. And I again, do what's best for your kids. Every place I've ever been, and we ran a completely different defense in the secondary because that's the kids that we had. You can go look at every spot that I've been at, and it's been completely different. And that's because the kids were completely different. The program had different needs. I had athletes at one, I didn't have athletes at other. I had really smart players at one, but they weren't great athletes. So we could do a little bit more disguise stuff to really help mitigate some of the athletic problems. Then when I was at Horn, it was like, man, I got just nothing but athletes. So now we're going to play a lot tighter to things. We're going to do it. I was teaching more of the nuances of coverage, where your eyes are going, the pattern matching off of it, so that we could really dictate it. And then in my last stop at Life School, we just really were not very athletic at all. We were behind the 8 ball. We had, 3 of the teams in our district were either going to the 3rd round or won a state title within in the last 5 years. So it was like, how can we make everything as simple as possible, but also be really in tune into capping these verticals, fatals. We don't want to give them up, make teams work. Yeah, we're probably going to get scored on, but let's make them work to buy ourselves some time. So I do agree. What are you seeing? And then defend what you see.
Yeah, I'm gonna say one thing, Daniel. I'll kick it over to you because I know you probably got some other stuff here too. But as a guy who runs an older offense, we see a lot of teams default, and that's fine. I don't hide from that, but we see a lot of teams default to stop us, and they go man, and I start drooling because that's what I want. Like, I can really confuse you when you go man, and we're running shifts, moves, all this kind of stuff, and you don't normally run man. You'd be better off just stay in your base, like Cody says. If you're running quarters or whatever, you'd be better off just to stay in that, because now I won't trick you and get 3 or 4 wide open shots a game because you went to something you'd never run for. I think that's probably going to lead into your next question there, Daniel. But what else you got on this before we kind of move there?
Well, yeah, I mean, y'all really segued into the last question several times now, and that's awesome. And that's kind of, in high school, how do we choose what to run? Because you're telling us, this all has to trickle down from the NFL, and at what point do I pull the trigger to go with a more complex coverage? But I just wanted to say, like, now's the time. More than any time in the history of football coaching, you have an opportunity to take something very complex, get it installed, the bases and spring ball, and then you get 7-on-7 all summer, right? I mean, and I know in Oklahoma, we get at least until the dead period, and I think there's a week after the dead period that we get to play 7-on-7. So you can take these very complex things and find how to make simple rules for them, which is what O-line coaches have been doing that for years, right? How do you get 5 dudes to do one thing? Well, you just give them rules, and you make sure those rules don't contradict each other, and then you go play football. So from the O-line standpoint, trying to, and I teach DB and O-line because that's what I like to do, I guess. So, I'm already ready for those rules, and that's what you get to do. But now we have that 7-on-7 culture where I can go out and I can get 80 stinking reps every Monday night and another 80 every Friday night if I want, whatever it is, to go practice this. And when I screw up, it doesn't cost me an actual touchdown, right? Mm-hmm. Sure, the other team might celebrate a little bit, but I'm going to come back and get a pick and a few plays anyway. So I just think that it's a really good time to start dabbling into something more complex. Our last couple episodes have been how to pick your offense and how to pick your defense. And so we'll be honest with you. Here we are talking podcast world. We've not recorded the defensive one yet. It will be recorded after this, and it'll come out before it. But I can tell you what we're going to say. Who are your personnel? What do you know? What other coaches do you have on staff that can teach it? Because that's the things that matter, right, when you go picking your defensive scheme. But now when we're talking coverages, you better know who your opponent is, what it is you need to stop. If you've won 8 games every year for 10 years, great. Why are you getting kicked out in the first round of the playoffs? So now you need to start, you can kind of plan ahead. If you're taking over a team that's 0-10 or they've got, continuously win 3 games, maybe this episode isn't for you. Maybe you need to go back to that last defensive episode, which we will record later, but come out before this, and figure out, more of a base defense to start in. So having said all that, Coach Alexander, I'll kind of kick this back to you. And what should high school coaches be looking at before they go making a determination of what defense to run, what coverage?
Yeah, I really think it comes down to the passing game, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that there's this fence or line, however you want to say it, drawn in football where you're either very pro 7-on-7 or you're very anti 7-on-7. I always looked at 7-on-7 as a tool to let's see stuff that we will never see in season, but it's going to stress us more than anything. And that allows us to create a toolbox to get more nuance, to learn different things. I go back one of my very first days at life school a couple years ago. We're at a 7-on-7 kind of. There were 4 teams. We do in Texas. You have your state qualifiers, but then a lot of teams to get the extra reps. You have kind of like a 7-on-7 league that y'all meet either once or twice a week, and so a team typically will get in the way that we run split field coverage. They'll take 1 and 2, line them up really wide, and they'll just set 3 on the hash. And then they'll try and isolate your mic, and they want to figure out how you're going to do that. And so I had to put in a coverage where we locked the mic. I had a mic that could run, so I didn't mind locking them up on a tight end, which is what we had. So I was not anticipating to really install that until the season, if we even needed it. But it came up, and guess what? From that day on, we could run that. I didn't have to actually cover it. So I actually lost time. I bought time back in the season because I wasn't going to have to go over that. I look at 7-on-7 as kind of a math problem, right? You have A plus B equals C, right? I've got to figure out, we're getting A, we're running B. This is the result. How do we change that? Do I need to change something up? Do I need to add? Do I need to subtract? Do I need to divide? Do I need to multiply? How do it, where in certain spots? So that's kind of where I am on 7-on-7. And I think you hit it correctly on. That's a time to really learn and fail. I never got fired up about 7-on-7. I'm not out there just like yelling and screaming, getting mad about 7-on-7. Now, if we're playing poor technique, we're being lazy. That's something completely different. We got to set the tone there. But in terms of just like, hey, oh, well, they got in bunch and they ran 3 verticals with a 4 push. Like, okay, we didn't work that. We need to work that. We'll figure that out. Well, okay, let's go to the sideline. Let's talk about it. Like that to me, yeah, okay. But I'm not going to get mad at a kid because we busted a coverage and they ran somebody up the seam and the kids played the rules that we had put in. So when I sit down in the off season and I'm looking at coverage, I'm looking at what we're getting. Are we getting play at, that was the biggest difference for me. I'm coming from the college level and then 5A big, 6A level in Dallas, which is very much RPO, Division I quarterbacks all over the place, Division I receivers all over the place, offensive coordinators that could easily be at the college level. And so when I went to 4A at life school, I had to completely rechange the way that I thought. I'm not getting RPOs. I'm getting play action. So for me, it became, we're really going to base in quarters. And then our changeup is going to be just cover 1. We're just going to play cover 1. And really what we ended up doing, because I only had 2 linebackers on the entire team. And only 1 could really play. So it was like, how can we do this? What we ended up developing into was a 5-man pressure cover 1 defense. I had 3 corners. We're going to guard the slot. We're going to guard the outside guys. I had 1 safety that was really good coming down into the box. He was going to come into the box. And then I just had another safety that was kind of a bonus player. But I was going to blitz the linebackers to where the fits needed to be. If you were a gap scheme team, we were going to attack your B gap. We were going to attack your tight end or away from tight end. If you're a sling tight end, we're going to attack away from tight end. If you're a power team, we were going to attack the tight end. We were at the spot. So, that to me is really what we became, because I really wasn't worried about RPOs. Everybody was spread to run for the most part, except for Stephenville. Stephenville, I think, threw like 40 times in the first half in a game. I'm breaking it down. I was like, I think they only ran the ball 5 times. I mean, they had like 80 plays in a game. And Stephenville 2 years ago, by the way, won the state title. So Uh, they wanted to pass the ball, and then in the second half they would just run the ball because they were already up on everybody. So it was like that to me was okay. How do we do it? So that every place, like I said, every place I've been, yes, I have my base defense, my philosophy, the way that I want to do things, coverage wise, teaching wise. But every place I went, whether it was Lovejoy, whether it was Midlothian, Mesquite Horn, or it was Life School, we had to change to fit our kids. We had to change because of the way that we had. Like I said, when I was at Horn, we were so talented, but we were so young and we didn't have a quarterback. So we were constantly playing catch up. We were constantly having to play. We had to play more or less like we were the ones that had to really slow the offense down to keep the game. We had to grind the game down. So we played a lot of off coverage. We wanted you to go for the 5-yard hitch. We wanted you to run the ball. We wanted you to stay off. We wanted the offense to stay. And I know that sounds crazy because we played Rockwall and Rockwall Heath, who both had Division I quarterbacks. Both were scoring 40 points a game. And it's like, how do you help your offense that can't score points? So it's like that kind of system. Then you go to Lovejoy. I go all the way back to Lovejoy where we had Division I quarterback. We had a Division I receiver. We're the ones that are scoring. We just had to make sure we didn't lose the game, right? Like, and all the athletes are on. All the athletes are on offense. How do we play with a bunch of really smart kids, but none of them are going to play in college, other than Bumper Pool. Shout out Bumper Pool. He's with the Carolina Panthers now. Leading tackler of all time at Arkansas. He's been calling defense since he was 14, by the way. So, I mean, the kid's a freak. But that was like our one defensive player. So it was it's like, how do you keep everything from going crazy? We just didn't need to lose the game. You go to Midlothian, we're a flexbone team. All the athletes are on defense. But we were super young. So it was keeping it simple. We played a lot more basically like 9-man spacing, 3-4 team. So I just go back, just using my own experience. Every place, every year is different. You can obviously get more nuanced as you go. You mentioned it earlier about I'm at a new program. We're not very successful. I feel like I've had that experience at Life School. We were that way. And then at Midlothian, my first year at Midlothian, we just were not very good and we were really young. And it's about teaching the basics, getting good at fundamentals, getting better every week, not worrying about, I got to get to my call sheet. I got to get to this blitz. I got to get to this coverage. I want this. I want that. And I think to me, that really is the biggest thing is when you go to a program that is not very good, it's doing the simple better, to steal from Dave Aranda. That's their motto this year at Baylor. And I think it's just so good, is doing the simple better. So when you're really trying to press reset, let's say you've got a bunch of seniors and they all graduated and you're looking at your defensive room and you're like, it's a bunch of puppies. You are in the mindset of, I've called all this stuff. I've been able to do a lot of stuff. Now you really got to go back and figure out, well, who are we as a defense before I move on? And so to me, that is where you go look at every year I was at Midlothian. Again, I had freshmen and sophomores in the secondary as at the first year. Second year, we were really good and we could start doing some stuff. By the time that my third year there, I mean, we averaged 91 yards passing a game. We had like 16 interceptions. 15 of them were from the secondary. So how did we get from giving up about 38 points a game to a bunch of Division I football players at Mansfield in that district to basically being one of the best defenses in the state at the 5A level? So to me, that was kind of the evolution. Look, we started small and we built. So that would be my suggestion. And then if you are on average, I mean, when on the other flip side of it, you just got this job you've earned the right to be at one of these big programs. You've earned the right to be at one of these great programs that have a bunch of kids that can do things. Remember, again, you can accelerate it, but still start small and build, get nuanced kind of the other, and don't default. And because this was the thing that I noticed when I went to Horn. Again, I had 5 Division I athletes in the secondary. The one thing that I noticed with my 2 Division I corners was that they had never really been taught football. It was always just lock that guy up. It was cat coverage. So don't default back to a simplistic view of like, well, we'll just play man. right? And so like that, to me, the best thing that I ever got was when those two kids went to summer, and they both texted me and was like, everything makes sense. It's everything that we worked on. I totally understand it. I feel like I'm a step ahead from some of these other kids that have just been playing man. And that to me, that's the most rewarding part of being a coach is I set you up for success when you got to that next level. I gave you those the understanding so that you kind of were a step ahead of everybody. So to me, that's what it is. And hey, if your offense is more complex, your defense is going to have to match that as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm gonna talk.
Sorry, Dean. Go ahead. My bad.
Okay. No, you're good. So a lot of people listening to this podcast are guys who have been running spot drop, cover 3 and cover 1 together for the last 20 years because I can teach it, because we never have a D1. That's not a thing that exists around here.
Right.
The water here does not produce D1 athletes. So I've got to do less with more, and sometimes that means being so fundamentally sound and simple that my kids can't screw up. So then if I get beat, it's because the offense beat me, not because the defense lost the game, right? I know that there's always the first year. So I say the first thing going into like installing one of these quarters coverage is understand you're going to have a rough first year, because I've installed it at a place and gave up 40 points per game just trying to learn the system. I also just watched Brent Venables go to the University of Oklahoma, where if you think talent's lacking there, you're crazy, and went 6-7, which is our worst season in common history. Like, but now all the defensive players this summer are talking about, we know, right? Like now we know what's going on.
Yeah.
So it makes you think there was literally times last year they just didn't know where they were supposed to be, like where they align what they're supposed to do. So there's always going to be that first year bump. So my question to you is, understanding that, how do you dip your toes into match quarters coverage without giving up the simplicity that you've had and whatever success you've been raking in the last few years? What is my first step to becoming a quarters team? Is it just running read 2? Because I know people do that and win state championships. So is it just start with read 2? Is it robber cover? Where do we start if I'm a guy that needs to introduce this, but I can't go install the full package this year?
Yeah, if you're a cover 1 team, I think the easiest transition would just go to 9-man spacing quarters, which was what 4 lock, Meg quarters, however you want to term it. Basically locking on number 1 with the corner. Whether it's off or on, I'll always start off. But if you've always kind of been a cover 1 press team, you go ahead and play press quarters. And your safeties now are going to play a little bit more like man. And then now your overhangs can be almost like a wall 2 player, a bang to buzz player, which again, those are, bang to buzz is a cover 3 term. I'm going to wall the slot. I'm going to bang on them, and then I'm going to buzz to the flat. Well, that's quarters, but instead we're capping 1 and 2. I think that's an easiest transition if I'm a cover 3 team. And I've primarily been a cover 3 team. Again, maybe running cover 2 to the passing strength, running quarters away, so you feel comfortable with a weak rotation and you kind of have those quarters tools already built in. That's another easy way. Now my 3-up player is always coming from the table. I don't have to worry about the vertical of 3 and then my linebacker. If I'm a spot drop team, the biggest thing, and I actually think it's easier transition from being a spot drop to a zone match team than it is to be a man team to then going to zone. If you're a man team, they're going to want to latch on and run. Right now, my eyes are away from the quad. I can't see anything. I don't know where the box is. I don't come off on smash rules. I don't come off on anything. Right, I'm just running. Right. And I think for guys like that, that's more difficult. But if I'm a zone, there's not a lot of difference. It's just tightening down the screw. I'm just tightening it up. I think quarters is the best place to start, because cover 2 becomes an issue of, what do you define as a vertical? What do I do when 2's out? Is the corner going to take it? Are we going to play squat coverage and let the corner keep sinking? Are we going to play trap? Are we going to play sight read? Are we going to play with a hard corner? Are we going to play? I think that there's just I think Nick Saban, I've searched the quote forever, but I know I've seen it. Nick Saban said one time, like on his tombstone, he's going to put cover 2, put me here, because he's still trying to figure out how to run true cover 2. And I think that's where I see more problems. Quarters is just man with rules. Right. Like I just have hey, we get a slant flat. We're just going to switch it off because we're not going to nail down on anything underneath 5 yards. Or,
Right.
we're just going to play man. And so it ends up playing out like man. I think that to me is really where I think that you can start. I think too, bracket, and I've said this on multiple different occasions, bracket, which I talked about at the beginning of the show, is the key to unlocking modern coverages. So if I'm a cover 3 team and I've been a match 3 team, and especially like I'm coming from the South, I'm an Alabama coach, I'm a Mississippi coach, I've been around the SEC, everybody runs Rip Liz. Every time I go visit a college coach, they're talking about Rip Liz, they're doing this. And so that's the ecosystem I live in. That's where you're already halfway there. Now you're just tight again. You're tightening everything down. Maybe you're playing like a 2 read away from it, which is a lot of it. To simplify the save and cover 7 stuff, that's a lot of like 7 bracket. That's a lot of what it is. It's bracket to the passing strength, and then it's kind of like a 2 read or a trap 2 or a cover 2 or a cone, however you want to define that away. So, and I know I'm throwing a lot of like coach speak, but
Coach, it's great because some people may not understand that we call the same stuff 9 names.
Yeah.
read 2 and palms and all that stuff.
Yes.
You know, it's all the same thing, with some defensive coordinators put a new terminology to it. So it's absolutely great that you're using those, because you may have to Google that stuff and go, oh, that's the same stuff.
Right. Yeah. I try and be like, my goal, I laugh about it. My goal is to be the Rosetta Stone of defense. Like, I want to be able, I can find the term that we both know, I'm trying to be. So that's why I give out like a laundry list of terms when I, and I never want to assume I don't even think I've even said sky or cloud in this entire thing. So I'm trying not to assume that people even understand or even know who I am. I try never to do that. So to me, I think, if I've been in the man universe, quarters is a great way to start. And in fact, I've always defaulted to cover 1 instead of cover 3. So I've always been a quarters with a cover 1. I think a lot of guys have talked about that are quarters guys. They just play cover 1. It's an easy transition because your guys already kind of have an idea of what man is. You're just kind of putting your safety down, and then all you're doing is you're cheating one safety to the post, and that's it. You've already most of the guys in the quarters world play poach or solo or kick coverage. So they already know a cheat step. They already know how to get to the middle of the field. You're just not carrying the vertical of 3 anymore because you got a man on them. I think if you're in the cover 3 world, it is probably easier to go to more of a 2 read scheme. Your safeties are already used to being high. Now the aiming point is a little further away. Maybe you start dabbling in Tampa. I know Tampa's coming back. A lot of guys are running Tampa. Tampa is cover 3. It's just your middle third players coming from the box.
Right.
And so there's in where I'm from, Cowboys. The Cowboys are a big cover 3 team. Dan Quinn's been a Pete Carroll guy forever. He's been a cover 3 guy, cover 1 guy almost everywhere that he's even been, even if you go all the way back to when he was at Florida. So to me, they run a ton of Tampa and really their rotations aren't that confusing. If it's third down, they just take out one of the backers and they may put a dime back. And now again, that may not be what you can do at your level, but you can teach your Mike linebacker to run the pole and just, hey, run vertical. He doesn't have to be a guy that has to cover. So I think showing cover 3, popping out to cover 2, because again, what are the things that you're going to give up in cover 3? You're going to give up the underneath coverage. All Tampa 2 is running cover 3 from the outside in, not the inside out. That's really all it is. You're just changing the contour of it. You're playing with 2 safeties instead of 1. And your corners are now hard in the flat, and now your 2 safeties are kind of the deep third outside, and then you have a pole runner. But there's so many different versions and ways to do it. Like if you're a cover 3 team and you've been running 3 cloud, you're not that far away from running 2 roll. You're running inverted 2 to one side, you're running cover 2 to the other side, and then you just got to figure out who you want to be the run through player on that. So I think cover 1 is a good, I say if you want to get into the match world, cover 1 with quarters. But if you are a big cover 1 team, a lot of teams now are starting to run a lot of these Tampa rotations. And so maybe Tampa is the one that you get into and have more of a, quote unquote spot drop. We don't want to get real heavy into match. We're already a man team. Let's get into Tampa. I know there's several teams here in the area. I know Hardin Simmons, I think here at the D3 level, is a big Tampa 2 team. So, I mean, you go North Dakota State has won how many national titles running 4-3 cover 2?
Yeah, quite a few.
And hot pressures. Ince is a great guy. I've known Coach Ince now for several years and talked to him about hot pressures, and they're a big Tampa 2 team. So you can win games at Tampa 2. Tampa 2 is not dead. It just looks a little different. I think I tweeted the other day. I said Tampa 2 is back. It just looks like your high school girlfriend. She just looks a little bit different. It's like you see her again. But it is Tampa 2. It's the same. It's the same. It's just people have kind of added different things to it. And contours to it. So that's kind of the roadmap, those 3 ways: cover 1 to quarters, cover 3 to maybe some Tampa. And then if I am cover 2 and I just need a change up, I need a too high change up, then Tampa might be the one for you.
All right. Well, I think we've talked a ton of football. People are going to be Googling the crap out of some terminology, and I think that's good, man. You need to be more versed.
Let me hit a couple of things on what Cody hit. I'll go quick because I know we're kind of right where we want to be, and I don't want to take any more time from him. But one, Cody, I'm glad you got the joy of coaching at a small school where you didn't have the athletes, because I think that makes us so much better coaches. And now you'll be able to relate to 95% of the rest of us that have to put a kid out there because you have to play 11. Well, I wanted to call sometimes the opponents, like, can we just do 10? Because I've got 10 good ones. It doesn't work that way. Second thing Cody kind of mentioned, I want to kind of get on here, is I know that a lot of guys that maybe listen to this are in my mindset. I hate 7-on-7 with passion. However, it can be a very useful tool, like Cody said, if you use it for what it's used for. And you go out there and you run quarters and you run all this different stuff. We like 7-on-7 a lot for our quarterback, and we like it a lot for our DBs. I hate it for my linebackers because they, no matter what you tell them, they drop and cover. But we like it for that stuff. So I do think that's a tool you need to use, especially if you're playing teams that throw it. You might not, just because I don't like something doesn't mean I'm not going to go do it because it's going to help my kids. And then Cody mentioned this also. He talked about philosophy. Like at all 3 schools he was at, what's the philosophy from the head coach? And that needs to dictate your coverages. Like, are you grind the game out, keep everything underneath and tackle it, which is what we've kind of been for a long time at Southside? Or do you want to score a bunch and make the game kind of go longer, where you may want to look at more press and explosive things? And then just a couple little notes I had. This is my belief. I know we're going to talk about this in the next podcast too, but I think you start on the back end when you're building your defense. I think it used to be you started on the front. Like baseball, you always would build up the middle. I'm not a baseball guy, but that's what I've heard. Basketball, you start with the point guard. I think football now, you start on the back with your defense before you figure out the rest of the structure. Like, that's got to be good before you even touch your box. I think that's important, kind of different the way than I used to do it. I already mentioned starting with your opponent, and then you start with your ability level. Cody mentioned that. This year for us, we're going to start a freshman at corner, my son who's a sophomore at safety, a first-year starter at the other corner is a junior, and then a senior, but we talked him into playing football for the first time since he was a freshman at the other safety. We were replacing 4 DBs. Okay, so for us, we're going to have to be very good at simple things and slowly build. And Cody hit that a bunch. Even when you get studs, and all 4 of those kids are very talented, very raw. So be very good at simple things. And then the last thing I would kind of mention to people is whatever coverage you go with. If you're going to go, and if you're going to do quarters, you need to buy all Cody's stuff. It's awesome. But if you're going to do that, you need to have every single adjustment in that coverage to everything you might see. If this is your base coverage, you shouldn't have to go into a Monday and say, hey, they run this set. This is going to change our coverage. Like, you should already know. If I get some kind of trips unbalanced, Cody mentioned it, flexbone, tight end, full house backfield, whatever, does your coverage have rules to deal with all of that? And as a young coach, a lot of times we don't think of those things. You need to teach it as rules, not show one formation and then talk how they adjust. Teach the rule. If we have twins, here's the rule. If we have trips, here's the rule. If we have one, here's the rule. If we have a tight end, here's the rule. And so that's got to be it. And then the last thing I'd say, that's when you add if you're a pitcher, if you're a dominant fastball thrower, what's your off speed? Cody mentioned that he went from cover 4 to cover 1. What is your change? Because at some point, if you're living in one coverage, somebody's going to get you. They're going to figure it out, and they're going to start getting you. What is your change? Maybe that's bracket. We've talked a lot about bracket. Maybe that's man. Maybe that's cover 3. There's a lot of coverage you can pick from. So that's the kind of notes that I had, Daniel. I know you're getting ready to kind of wrap us up, but I wanted to make sure, because I thought that was great stuff from Cody. I want to make sure that if you're a younger guy listening to that, because he is a wealth of knowledge. And I would recommend, he's got, I don't know how many books now, 4 or 5, I think. They're all extremely good, extremely detailed.
Yeah, and we'll let you plug those in just a moment, Coach. Last part before we get out of here, what not to do as a coach.
Oh, yeah.
What I assume is many people's one of their favorite segments of this podcast. So what's today's lesson, Coach Simpson?
Yeah, so today's lesson is this. You hear us talk on here, and Cody's one of the smartest guys I've ever had the chance to talk with, yet he talked where you could understand, okay? Don't go to your kids and start using terms they have no idea what they mean. Like, talk simple to your kids. Cody's one of the best I've ever seen at doing this, of making things that are difficult simple. So today's lesson as a coach is talk to the lowest IQ in the room. When you go in there and you're talking to your kids, talk to them as though they don't know, and don't make assumptions, because I don't care if they're a Division I level kid. I don't care if they're playing at the collegiate level. There are a lot of people that when you start talking, you need to make sure that you're talking where they understand it and it's simple, not to sound smart. Cody sounds smart because he is smart. There's times I sound smart because I hope I am kind of smart. Daniel, same thing. But when I talk to a 15-year-old, I talk in terms they understand. I talk in ways they can relate to. I talk in things that makes it really easy for them. A lot of times as coaches, we go to clinics and we get coached up because that's what we do. We're professionals and we spend a lot of money to do this. And so we learn all of this stuff, and it's great stuff to know. But be careful when you talk to your kids that you talk in your terminology and ways they understand it, and you don't ever assume. I got a freshman out there at corner. You know, if I use the word cap, he would look at me cross-eyed, like, what does that mean? So I'm going to tell him, hey, cap means don't let a guy over top of you. He understands that one. You know, so that's the kind of terminology things you need to be taking from hopefully this podcast is Cody gave you all these terms. What's your terminology? You know, what are you going to make that for your kids where they understand it? And that's one of the reasons we offer that workbook. That means a coordinator workbook. I think Cody has things on his website as well, where you can come up with your own glossary of terms so that you're speaking to kids and they understand what you're saying.
Awesome. All right, Coach. We will close out here. If you'll just tell us one more time how we can simplify football for our coaches and our players.
Sure. Coaching 101 podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions, which houses offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, defensivecoordinatoracademy.com. Cody has a session in there. FBCoachSimpson.com, all things gun tee, all things 3-4, all things football coaching. If you want a material, one of those 3 websites is probably going to have something like that.
Awesome. And Coach Alexander, I know that you have written several books. If you'd like to go ahead and plug those here, it's a great place to let people know where to go out and find those at.
Yeah, you know, we were talking about quarters. Really, what I would encourage you to do, if you really you say I want a base knowledge of quarters, what are things that I can do? I would really encourage you, one, to buy my match quarters, and you can find it on Amazon. Just type in match quarters. Either one word and it'll take you to my author page, or 2 words and it will take you to my white book, which is my guidebook to split field coverage. And I go through what I call sky and cloud, which is quarters and to read, and how I teach it, why we do it, how the adjustments and the tags. So everything that you need to start will be right there. And if you want another resource to bounce it off of, because I'm the same way, I want to go to the source, but then I also want to see how other people are doing it and doing it successfully. Jerry Gordon, who is a legendary coach. In fact, he's kind of the one that made the underfront famous. If you're a 3-4 guy, he was at Boston College forever. I think his team's undefeated right now in Division II Italy football right now. Jerry's been really a good friend of mine to bounce ideas off of. And what I love about Jerry is he keeps everything really simple. And so Jerry Gordon, he has a split field coverage book as well. If you follow him on Twitter, find him. He's got a link to his book. I would get those 2 books. And I would read, you can either start with his or start with mine. And I would read those. And you can either, if I want to get more complex, you can probably lean towards my stuff. If you want to be really simple, you can lean towards his. Or if you want to be in the middle, you can probably pick and choose, because that's what great coaches do. This offseason, more than ever, I have found myself saying there is nothing new in football. We just live in a different time, in a different setting. And so I think all of this stuff has been around, and all this stuff you can use, and no coach has really just invented anything. And so what they're just stealing ideas from other people and recalibrating it to fit their needs. So that would be what I do. Again, I have 6 books. They're all on Amazon. Again, you can go to Match Quarters, one word. You can find it on the author page. You can follow me again on any of the social media. Just type in Match Quarters, except for Twitter. It's at @the_coach_A. And again, my DMs are always open. I don't mind asking questions. I would subscribe to Substack. I cover, football in depth, especially defense, and a lot of the things that you heard, I'm talking over and really breaking down on that as well.
Perfect. You can find me on the Twitter machine at Coach Chambo OK. You can email me for questions, anything about the podcast, our guests, whatever it is, at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. Coach Simpson, where can we find you, sir?
All things FB Coach Simpson. So at FB Coach Simpson on Twitter, FB Coach Simpson at gmail.com is my email. You can find me on YouTube. Of course, FB Coach Simpson, the website. And if you are listening to this and you do want to get information about the podcast, you can go to fbcoachsimpson.com/podcast. Sign up there for the email list, and we'll let you know. We're going to have other really good guests, like we had Cody on this one. You'll get information from us about what's coming up and what we've already covered.
Awesome. Podcast on Twitter is at Coaching101pod. We want to thank you for being a listener to the Coaching 101 podcast. We hope you'll join us next week as we continue to make the complex more simple. Please consider subscribing to the show so you'll always know when the new episodes are out. We'll leave you with this. It's hard to beat someone who never gives up. No matter the situation, find a way.